Traveling for work is something I had gotten used to over the years. Airports, rental cars, unfamiliar cities, it all became routine after a while. But there's one trip I'll never forget. One where everything felt wrong from the moment I checked into the Airbnb. The eerie feeling in that apartment still haunts me to this day. It started like any other work trip. I had been scheduled for a conference in a city I'd never been to before. One of those small but rapidly growing cities that pop up on every top 10 places to move list. It was a place I had heard about in passing, but never really paid much attention to. Still, I was excited for a change of scenery. The host of the Airbnb, Clara, had been incredibly responsive and friendly through the entire booking process, which was why I didn't think anything could possibly go wrong. Her messages were prompt and professional, always answering my questions in great detail. But there was something about the way she wrote that lingered in my mind. At first, it was easy to ignore, perhaps a formality, or just the way people from different cultures communicate. Her profile picture was a black and white photo, a little blurry, but you could make out her face. Thin, almost gaunt, with large, dark eyes that seemed to stare through the camera. Her hair was long and stringy, falling over her face in a way that made it hard to tell if it was intentionally styled or just unkempt. There was a subtle smile on her lips, but it wasn't warm. It was more like the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who knows something you don't. The picture was old too, probably taken years ago. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Lots of people have outdated profile pictures. But after everything that happened, the memory of that image stayed with me, nagging at the back of my mind. When I first messaged her to confirm my arrival time, she replied almost immediately, which put me at ease. Her responses were polite, but they lacked any real warmth or personality. It felt mechanical, like she was reciting from a script.
"We're excited to host you,"
one of her messages said, though something about the wording felt distant. I brushed it off at the time. It's just an Airbnb host after all, but the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. She had given me detailed instructions for accessing the apartment, which was strangely meticulous. Every little detail was accounted for, down to the number of steps to the elevator, and even the feel of the key in the lock. It seemed excessive, but I figured maybe she was just thorough. In hindsight, it almost felt like she was preparing me for something more than just finding my way in. The day before my arrival, she sent another message, thanking me for booking and reminding me of the check-in procedure. But this time, her tone was different.
"Once you're inside, make sure you lock the door quickly,"
she wrote.
"It can get a bit drafty in the hallways and you wouldn't want the door to swing open unexpectedly."
I laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to a quirky personality, but rereading it now sends chills down my spine. It was as if she knew something about the place that I didn't. When I arrived, I didn't meet her in person. She mentioned that she didn't live in the building, which is pretty common for Airbnb hosts, but she signed off her message with a peculiar phrase that still makes my skin crawl. "I'll be keeping an eye on things from afar. Let me know if you need anything." At the time, I assumed she meant she would be checking in via the app or messages, but after everything that happened, those words took on a more sinister meaning. It wasn't just the apartment that felt wrong. It was her. I arrived late on a Friday night, exhausted after a long flight and a layover that felt like it would never end. The Airbnb looked great in the photos. It was a sleek, modern apartment with big windows, stylish furniture, and a great view of the city skyline. When I got there, the street was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural, like everything around you is holding its breath. The apartment building itself was old, though it had been renovated recently, and the entrance was tucked away on a narrow side street. It was late, around 9 p.m., and most of the nearby shops were closed. The glow of streetlights was the only source of illumination as I fumbled with the code the host had given me for the lockbox. The key was easy enough to retrieve, and I let myself into the building. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed how sterile everything felt. The hallway was freshly painted, the floors were spotless, but there was something too perfect about it all. The walls were stark white, and the dim overhead lighting made the shadows stretch unnaturally long, almost like the building was trying to conceal something beneath its clean surface. The air was thick with the faint smell of fresh paint, which clung to my nose, almost suffocating. It wasn't the smell itself that bothered me, but the thought that everything here was newly covered, like the building was trying to hide something beneath layers of renovation. It gave me an unsettling sense of artificial calm, as if the building was putting on a mask. I pressed the button for the elevator, and almost immediately, the doors slid open with a mechanical groan. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow across the small, cramped space. The elevator felt old, out of place compared to the rest of the building, with its rusted metal handrails and a floor that was scuffed and worn from years of use. As the doors closed behind me, the sensation of being trapped in a metal box with no windows began to settle in. I hit the button for the third floor, and the elevator lurched to life with a sudden jolt. The old mechanisms creaked and groaned as it made its slow ascent. Every second inside felt longer than it should have, like the elevator was moving through thick fog instead of air. The building was only 4 floors high, but it felt like the ride was dragging on forever. I stared at the glowing numbers above the door. 1, 2, 3, and tried to shake off the strange sense of unease that was starting to creep into my thoughts. It's just an old elevator, I told myself. Buildings like this make noises. But as the numbers changed, there was no other sound. No muffled voices from nearby apartments. No televisions playing late-night shows. No footsteps. The whole place was silent. Too silent. When the doors finally slid open on the 3rd floor, I stepped out into another eerily pristine hallway. The silence was oppressive here, even more so than before. It was as if the entire floor had been deserted for years despite the renovations. The walls, though freshly painted, seemed to absorb every sound, creating a vacuum of stillness. There were no signs of life, no distant chatter, no hum of appliances. Just silence, and the rhythmic echo of my own footsteps as I walked down the narrow corridor. As I passed the other apartments, I glanced at the doors, each one identical, with numbers neatly etched into brass plaques. They all looked like they hadn't been touched in years. No decorations, no welcome mats, no signs of anyone actually living there. It was as if I was the only person in the entire building. I finally reached the apartment I'd rented. The door was plain, nothing special about it. But as I inserted the key into the lock, I felt a cold draft coming from beneath the door. It made me pause. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, that creeping sense of dread clawing its way back up. But I brushed it off again, convincing myself I was just tired. After all, I was here for work, not to let my imagination run wild. As I turned the key and stepped inside, the door closed behind me with a soft click, cutting off the last connection I had to the outside world. Little did I know, that feeling of isolation was only going to get worse. The Airbnb was a small but stylish apartment that felt both welcoming and a little creepy. As I walked in, I saw a narrow hallway that led to the main areas of the place. To my right was a cozy living room, furnished with a soft navy blue sofa and a shiny glass coffee table. A flat-screen TV was mounted on the wall, but it seemed strange there, almost like it had never been used. It looked modern, with colorful art on the walls and a big rug that made the wooden floor feel warm. There was a small dining area with a simple wooden dining table and 2 chairs. Straight ahead from the entrance was a walkway that led into the bedroom. The walkway was narrow but lined with soft lighting that gave it a gentle glow. The bedroom was nicely decorated, with a queen-sized bed covered in soft blankets and fluffy pillows. A small lamp on a bedside table lit up the room just enough to see, but it didn't chase away the growing shadows. A window on the far wall offered a nice view of the city skyline, but at night, it looked covered by a dark blanket, with the lights outside appearing as tiny dots in the darkness. To the left of the living room was the bathroom, a small but useful space with shiny tiles and modern features. A light, fresh scent of soap filled the air, making it smell clean, which felt different from the uneasy feelings I had. The bathroom had a glass shower with sparkling tiles, a small sink with a clear mirror, and a toilet tucked away in the corner. It was a place meant to be comfortable, but it felt a bit mysterious too, as if it had seen things that were best kept secret. It wasn't until I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, that I heard the first noise. At this time, the apartment was enveloped in a more heavy silence, the kind that wraps around you like a thick blanket, muffling the outside world. The only sound was the soft tapping of my fingers against the screen. But then, cutting through that stillness, I heard it. A subtle thud, like something had fallen on the floor above me. At first, I brushed it off, assuming it was just the normal sounds of an apartment building settling. Perhaps a neighbor had dropped something or was moving furniture in the unit above. I paused, straining to listen, but the noise didn't come again. Just the soft hum of my phone and the distant murmur of traffic outside. I tried to dismiss it, reminding myself that I was in a new place, and unfamiliar sounds often spark our imaginations. After all, I was a frequent traveler. I'd dealt with strange noises before. Yet, as I lay there, a nagging unease began to creep in, gnawing at the back of my mind. It was just a thud, I reasoned. Just the normal sounds of life in an apartment building. I went back to scrolling through my phone, but that strange feeling of unease still lingered in the back of my mind. I'm not someone who usually gets creeped out easily, but something about that place didn't sit right with me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a long day and I was tired. Around midnight, I was on the verge of falling asleep when I heard it again. Another noise, this time closer. It was a soft creak, like the floorboards shifting under someone's weight. I opened my eyes and listened carefully. The noise wasn't coming from above me this time. It sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. My heart started pounding in my chest. I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything else, but the apartment was dead silent again. I told myself it was just an old building. Old buildings make noises. Maybe the heat was coming on, or the wood was settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I got out of bed and walked toward the front door, slowly turning the knob and peeking into the hallway. Nothing. It was empty, just as I had left it. The dim light from a street lamp outside cast long shadows across the rooms, but everything looked normal. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. The air felt heavy, like the hallway was holding its breath along with me. I quickly shut the door and went back to bed, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But I couldn't fall back asleep. Every little creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a subtle creak or a faint thud. It was the unmistakable sound of the front door softly closing, as if someone was trying to be as quiet as possible. I froze. My heart was racing now, thumping so loudly in my chest that I could hear it in my ears. I didn't leave the front door unlocked. I am sure I'd locked it earlier the first time. There was no way anyone could have able to come in. Or so I thought. Grabbing my phone, I quietly got out of bed and made my way to the living room. The apartment felt colder, and the silence was deafening. I couldn't hear any neighbors, any traffic, or even the faint hum of appliances. Just silence. When I got to the living room, everything looked the same, except for one small detail. One of the chairs at the dining table had been pulled out slightly, just enough for me to notice. I was sure I hadn't touched that chair when I came in. In fact, I hadn't even gone near the table since I arrived. I stood there staring at the chair, my mind racing. Was someone else in the apartment? Had someone been here the whole time, hiding somewhere? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I slowly walked over to the front door, checking the lock. It was still locked from the inside, just like I'd left it. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there. But I heard the door closing, and the chair. That chair was definitely moved. I decided to check the apartment again, just to be sure. Starting with the bathroom, I turned on the light and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. No windows were open, no signs of anyone being there. But as I turned to leave the bathroom, something caught my eye. In the mirror, I saw a shadow. It wasn't my reflection. It was something else. Something standing in the walkway behind me. I froze. My body went cold. For a second, I thought I was seeing things, but when I looked again, the shadow was still there. It was tall, human-shaped, but there was no face, no features, just darkness. And it was standing perfectly still, as if watching me. I turned around quickly, but the walkway was empty. The shadow was gone. My heart was racing and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was in that apartment with me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat on the couch in the living room with every light in the apartment turned on, clutching my phone. I considered calling the host or even the police, but I kept telling myself that I was just overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation for everything. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was the stress of traveling. Then around 4 a.m., the apartment went completely dark, all at once. The lights I had carefully left on, every single one, went out in unison. Even my phone screen dimmed to nothing. The room was suddenly swallowed in pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt suffocating. It was as if the apartment itself had been cut off from the world outside. That's when I felt it. A presence. It was no longer just an eerie feeling, no longer just my imagination playing tricks on me. This was different, stronger, more real. It was standing right behind me. My heart pounded so hard it was the only thing I could hear. I didn't move a muscle, paralyzed by fear. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear breathing. Nothing. But I could feel it. The air around me had turned ice cold, sending chills up my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight, like they were sensing something I couldn't see. The living room felt smaller, like the darkness was pressing in on me, trapping me in that moment. I was too scared to move. Even breathing felt like a risk. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay still, not to turn around. Because I knew, somehow I just knew, that if I turned, I'd see it again. That shadow, that thing that had been watching me since I arrived. But I couldn't sit there forever trapped in the dark. My mind raced. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I had to move. Slowly, painfully slowly, I turned my head, bracing myself for what I'd see standing behind me. My chest tightened, every second stretching out as my eyes adjusted to the dark. And there was nothing. No one was behind me. But that didn't make me feel any safer. The air was still heavy with something unexplainable. I stood up so fast that my head spun, adrenaline pulsing through my veins. My bag was on the table in the living room. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, heart racing, not even bothering to check if I had everything. I just knew I had to leave. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night and that I had nowhere to go. My only thought was to get out. Get out now, before whatever was in that apartment decided to show itself again. My feet moved on instinct, rushing me toward the door as if they knew better than my brain what would happen if I stayed a second longer. I reached the door and pulled it open, stepping into the hallway without looking back. I didn't even lock it behind me. I was done with that place, with whatever had been lurking in its shadows. The hallway lights flickered as I stumbled down the corridor, each step taking me further away from that suffocating presence. The air finally starting to feel normal again. But as I reached the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was still watching me. waiting for me to make one last mistake. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I knew was I had to get far, far away. My hand hovered over the elevator button for a moment before I pressed it, feeling the cool metal under my fingers. The hallway behind me was far too quiet. The light on the button flickered, and I waited. Seconds dragged on, and I could feel the tension in the air building. Every instinct was screaming at me to move, to run, but where would I go? Finally, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside and hit the button for the lobby, praying that the descent would be quick. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began to move. It was slow and sluggish before. A chill ran down my spine as I watched the floor indicator. 3, 2, then it stopped. I stood there frozen, staring at the unmoving number 2. The elevator hadn't reached the lobby yet. I hit the button again, and nothing happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming faster. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. I jabbed the button harder this time, trying to make it move. Still nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified. The air felt colder, and a prickling sensation crawled over my skin. I could feel something. Someone was in the tiny space with me. I stood there desperate for the elevator to move, and I could feel the presence closer now, right behind me. Then, without warning, the elevator jolted and started moving again. When the doors finally opened, I stumbled out into the lobby, my legs shaking beneath me. The air felt lighter, safer, but I still didn't dare look back. Whatever had been in that elevator with me, I wasn't about to find out. I bolted through the lobby doors and into the cold night air, my chest heaving with each breath. I didn't care what time it was or where I would go. I just knew I had to get as far away from that building as possible. The next morning, after spending the rest of the night in a cheap hotel across town, I finally worked up the courage to message Clara, the host. My fingers trembled as I typed out a polite but urgent message, asking if she knew of any issues with the electricity in the building, or if anyone had reported strange occurrences recently. I hesitated, wondering if I should mention the eerie figure I had seen in the window, but decided against it. I didn't want to sound paranoid. After a few minutes, her response came through.
I've never had any issues like that before.
Clara replied.
The building is usually very quiet. No one rented the floor above you, though. That unit has been vacant for months.
My heart sank. I read her message over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. Vacant? Then what was that noise I'd heard? And who or what had been standing in the window when I left? I wanted to ask her more, to push for answers, but a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I realized I didn't want to know. The truth, whatever it was, would be far worse than my imagination. I ended the conversation with a quick, "Thanks for the info," and closed my phone, trying to put it behind me. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake off what happened.